Sri Lanka's most powerful news brand.
Good evening to our viewers and good evening to our listeners on Yes 101. I'm going to bring you details of the MiG deal, the famous controversial MiG deal, and about the details of former ambassador to Russia, Mr. Udayanga Weeratinga. Now, Mr. Weeratinga has been issuing media releases about this MiG deal, and he has been issuing one today as well, or in fact yesterday, and we received this particular media release today. In this letter, he reveals a lot of details pertaining to this MiG deal. One could question as to how he knows so much about this MiG deal if he was not involved in it at one point, or if he was not involved in it at all. Now, we are talking about a deal to buy 4 new MiG aircraft and another deal to actually refurbish or to repair 4 more. Altogether, 8 more MiG aircraft at a cost of $14 million US. Now, the first letter sent out to the stakeholders with regard to this MiG deal has been sent out on the 6th of February 2006. And this is that letter, and we have a copy of it as well. Now, if you take a look at things and if you move forward, Udayanga Weeratinga was the ambassador to Russia and the Ukraine at the time. Now, there is a saying that this particular deal, the MiG deal, was a government-to-government transaction, a G-to-G transaction. Then why was there a third party involved in this deal? Why was a third party introduced? And Mr. Udayanga Weeratinga, you say in your letter that you were in Russia from 1985. Did you or did you not mediate this deal between the third party, the government of Russia and the government of Sri Lanka? Now, as I said before, Udayanga maintains that this is a government-to-government transaction. And if this was a government-to-government transaction, this third party that we are talking about is Belimisa Holdings Limited. How did they get involved in this? Now, with regard to all of this, as I said, a letter has been issued on the 6th of February 2006, and there is no mention of a third party there. They are only mentioning about a financier without mentioning any names. As you go along, the final contract, the second letter with regard to this MiG deal, mentions of a third party in addition to the buyer and the seller. Now, this Belimisa Holdings address has been listed as an address in London. They did not have an office in London. What they did have in London was an accommodation address service. Basically, you just pay for the mails that you receive, and that is it. That is all that is there. Now, not soon after Sri Lanka paid for this particular MiG deal, when the transaction happened, Belimisa Holdings Limited was also not there anymore. It magically disappeared. Now, nobody has been able to obtain details of this Belimisa Holdings Limited, and even senior DIG Udayanga of the FCID has apparently not been able to find any details. Now, as I told you at the outset, Mr. Weeratinga has been issuing various media releases with regard to this MiG transaction. In the media release Mr. Weeratinga has sent out yesterday, he is trying to place the blame on state sector officials or the Sri Lanka Air Force with regard to this MiG transaction that happened. It's shameful actions from a former ambassador, being a state sector employee himself. Now, the role of the Sri Lanka Air Force with regard to the MiG deal was strictly professional. It was in terms of the technical aspects of these particular MiGs. They were not involved in any other matter pertaining to this. There was a professional involvement. The financial arrangements were the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Defence. Now, Udayanga Weeratinga is saying there is no international warrant against him. He mentions this in his media release that he has sent out. He is saying that he is currently in Nepal, and Udayanga says he has been living in Russia from 1985. He was there as the ambassador to the country sent by the former president of our country. He was there on a duty, an official, a diplomatic purpose. He was sent there to represent the executive presidency of our country. The ambassador of a country represents the executive presidency. Now, he probably has many passports. He probably has a DPL, a diplomatic passport. He probably has a Sri Lankan, he was a dual citizen from Sri Lanka, a Sri Lankan passport if he was a dual citizen. And then maybe he also had a Russian or a Ukrainian passport. We do not know. He is traveling across the world. If you monitor his Facebook social media logins, you can very clearly see that he has been traveling across the world. So this is how he is traveling, and there is no need to write or issue media releases and explain yourself before the media. There is a court system, a judiciary in our country. You can come down to Sri Lanka, state your case before the media and prove your innocence and move on. It's simply that. Now there is no need to issue media releases like this, insulting the president of our country, insulting the state sector officials. Maybe a quick lesson for the state sector officials as well. The politicians carry out their dealings. They very quickly, as soon as they are caught or soon as attention is drawn towards their corrupt dealings, they are very swift in drawing all that attention, drawing all that negativity towards the state sector officials, and they move on like nothing ever happened. Now the media is speaking on behalf of the state sector officials as well. If someone is doing something wrong that is punishable, then that person should be punished. There is no two words about it. But if someone is trying to do something wrong, and if that someone is trying to put the blame on state sector officials and move on, then there is something wrong, and then the media should be talking about it. Mr. Weeratinga also speaks about how his bank accounts have been blocked by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in this particular media release that I'm talking about. We have found out information to say that Mr. Weeratinga has 13 different accounts across the world to do transactions with. And who is Mr. Weeratinga trying to mislead by sending out media releases like this is a question that we have to find answers for. Now, a critical juncture in terms of this whole MiG deal was the death of a person by the name Noel Ranasinghe. He died under suspicious circumstances, died from an alleged car crash in the Ukraine. He was youth living in Ukraine for the DPL services. He's a boy from Attanagalla from Sri Lanka. Now, when this accident happened, just weeks or months before, that person had called, Noel had called his relatives here in Sri Lanka and said, look, I have money in my account now since we were able to do a certain transaction with regard to aircraft. And the relatives, when the death of this youth happened back in the day, came out and revealed all of this before the media. Now, we have information that the relatives are not well, they are working in the state sector still, so they cannot come openly and speak about the death, the suspicious circumstances surrounding this boy's death. So the media has taken up that role, and we will bring those details to you as well. Mr. Weeratinga speaks as if there is nothing wrong with regard to the death of Mr. Noel Ranasinghe, but the media will delve deeper into this as well. Like we are bringing you the details of the MiG transaction, we will soon bring you the details of the death of Noel Ranasinghe as well. We report, you decide. With that, we go into a short commercial break. It's goodbye for our viewers and goodbye to our Yes listeners as well.